In this video, we're going to look at the new virtual machine replica feature that we get in Hyper-V version 3.0, obviously with Windows Server 2012. About my environment, I have two computers, one called primary, one called secondary. These computers are sitting on the same IP network, but they wouldn't need to be for that. But they share nothing else in common. There's no storage, there's no Windows cluster or anything along those lines. So in Server Manager here we can see the two computers, primary and secondary. And if we go into the Hyper-V Manager, we can see obviously the machines have been detected as running Hyper-V, and I can administer them by going into the Hyper-V Management Console. When I go into the Hyper-V Management Console, we can see the two machines listed, and I can see that I have a set of virtual machines actually running. We can see on the secondary host there are no virtual machines there at this time. So on the primary host, the first thing I need to do is configure the replication rules. So going into the Hyper-V settings, I can choose the replication configuration on the left hand side, and I can enable replication. Okay, enable this computer as a replica server. So I can choose to use HTTP or HTTPS or both, and obviously specify the port numbers. If I'm using HTTPS, I need to use a certificate which supports both client and server authentication, and that allows us to have encrypted file transfers. We've then got the control about who do we want to allow to replicate with. So by default we will allow replication with any authorized server. However, you can change that, as we are, to a specific list. So we now have to add an authentication or authorization entry. So this allows us to add specific servers. We can use wildcarding, so we can say, for example, all computers from a specific domain. In this instance, I'm going to put a specific machine. You can specify where the virtual disk files are to be stored, so fairly straightforward, as you can see there. And you can then actually specify what we call a trust group. So this is in order for replication to occur, the machines need to be a member of the same group as well. So just filling in this group. This can be quite handy as a feature for service providers. So you might want to provide a Hyper-V estate, so you could actually have a range of your customers copying their virtual machines to you for disaster recovery, and to prevent that, or to ensure that a virtual machine from one customer couldn't be replicated somewhere else, you could use the group. You can see that I've got a firewall warning. The firewall warning telling me that I need to open the HTTP listener for the replica service. Obviously, if I'd chosen HTTPS, it would have said HTTPS. The firewall does not get opened automatically, so you have to go in and enable the firewall. However, there is a firewall rule created, so it is literally a case of just enabling the default firewall rule. So if we come down the firewall rules, you will actually see the firewall rule was listed. I actually already enabled this as part of the system setup, and you can see the HTTPS one there, which hasn't been enabled. So we can close that down, and we can effectively go and do the same configuration requirements actually on the secondary server. So we can go to the secondary machine, go into the Hyper-V settings, and we can set corresponding configuration for replica. So again, turn the feature on, specify the ports, and again set the groups up and so on. Now, you might wonder why you need to sort of set the replica at both ends, and ultimately, if we were in a scenario where we failed over the virtual machine to the secondary host in this instance, you might want to initiate replication back the other way once you've fixed your primary host. So this allows us to do that, so we can reverse the direction of replication. What we just finished in this configuration off, just then hopefully be able to go in and enable a virtual machine for the purpose of replication. So again, we will get the warning about the firewall, but that's already been set. So we'll just OK that box and save the settings. Okay, so back onto the primary server, and we'll go and enable replication. So I've selected a virtual machine, right click on the virtual machine and choose enable replication. Get a simple wizard appear. So the first question you get asked is to specify the server that's going to hold or maintain the copy. So I'll put in secondary. You then get to specify the connection mechanism, so effectively whether you want to use HTTP or HTTPS, obviously you have no choice because of what we've already used or what we've already set up. You then get to choose the VHD, so potentially you could choose not to copy some VHDs, for example. You then get to determine how many recovery points you'd like. So by default you only get the latest recovery point. You could choose to actually maintain additional recovery points as snapshots. So if you choose the additional recovery points, you would have up to 4 additional recovery points created, or whatever number you put into the box, and these are taken hourly, so you'd be able to roll back in 1 hour increments. Also down the bottom you've got an option for enabling VSS. What that would do is that would actually instruct applications that are VSS aware inside the VM that they're going to be snapshot, at which point give them the opportunity to flush all their data to disk to try and make the application data a bit more crash consistent and therefore better recovery if you ever had to fail over to the recovery virtual machine in a disaster. The next question is basically about how we're going to do the initial copy. So do you wish to sort of just copy the content across the network? Do you want to copy it to some sort of external medium and then import it? You're going to use a virtual machine that already exists, and you can obviously schedule it for later on. And then we get the completion box. So this will basically go and do an initial replication for us. So effectively we've got the initial replication and we've taken an initial snapshot. So if we go over to the secondary system, we should hopefully see the machine is in existence, and we should actually have an option that says it's receiving changes and how far through the process is. So this is building the initial copy of the virtual machine. Now when we went through the wizard, there was the option to have some historical snapshots, but there wasn't any option to control replication itself. And the reason for that is the replication is dealt with automatically, and the system will replicate virtual machine changes every 5 to 15 minutes. And the reason it's 5 to 15 minutes is it depends on how much data's changed. So if the VM is not changing much data, then we'll replicate every 5 minutes and keep the data in sync. If it happens that to replicate the sheer quantity of changes has taken more than 5 minutes, then we'll basically replicate as frequently as we can. So hopefully we should be getting fairly close to the completion of the initial replication. I have sped the video up slightly to ensure that the video is not too long while we're actually creating the replica. Having got quite close to the end of the replica creation now, it's got about 10% to go, what we will then start to see is the system taking these snapshots. So hopefully we'll see that when the replica is complete, the snapshot that was created, so the map40A initial replica snapshot, will disappear, and it will actually merge the VHD files in while the virtual machine is running. There we go. So any changes that occurred to the virtual machine. So again, rather than us sit here for several hours, I've just basically sped up the video so that we will see what it looks like in the status display each time one of those 1 hourly synchronizations actually occur. So there's the first one, just replicating the changes on the hour. So you just get a small status message, and obviously it stays there as long as it needs to for the change, and I've paused the screen now so you could read the message. So what you will notice, just while I'm waiting for the second one to come along, you will notice down the bottom of the Hyper-V management console now, we actually have some new tabs, obviously highlighting memory and networking, but we also have a replication tab. So the replication tab, as you'll see later on, allows you to view the status of the replication, when replication last occurred, if replication is working successfully, and so on. So we should be coming to the point where we can see the second snapshot being taken, and again we'll just have a small freeze frame, so again you can see the status message as the snapshot's taken to replicate the changes. So there we go. So there's the second one. In reality this took less than a second on each of the times, because obviously not much is changing inside the virtual machine. So hopefully what we'll start to see now is some of the things that have happened during the replica process. So if I go to the secondary machine, you can see that we've got the virtual machine and we have those sort of replica snapshots that have been copied across for the system. If I go back to the primary system and highlight the virtual machine, we actually have access to the tabs down the bottom, and we should be able to see the status of replication. So whether we're the primary or the secondary machine, and when replication last occurred, and so on. If I connect to the machine, we should be able to see that we can interact with the live machine as you would expect, and what we could do is we could go and make a couple of minor changes to the machine. So we'll just connect, and we'll just go and create a shortcut on the desktop. So it is quite important at this point to remember this is not live mirroring. You know, the other machine is not switched on, and we are basically transferring data based on a sort of replication interval, which is as frequent as every 5 minutes. So I was going to do something fairly simple like create a folder. Okay, so we've got a change that's occurred inside the primary system. So just log off and close the console window down. So we can actually see the time's not moved on in terms of the replication down the bottom, because oh, there we go, just a replication has just now occurred. So obviously you've got to merge those changes. So if I go to the replication menu that we have now, we now actually have some options for viewing replication, and one of the things I can do is view the replication health. So again, slightly more detail than the panel at the bottom, to actually see again who the primary, who the secondary or the replica server is, when it last occurred, how big the virtual machine is, and various details. Also on the replication tab there is the option for providing what we call a planned failover. So this option allows me to sort of initiate a failover in a controlled way. So it's basically going to make sure the virtual machine's off, which you can see our virtual machine is running, our source machine. So I actually get an error saying, well, this is not going to be a planned failover because you know, the machine you've got is running. We need to have it in a QS disk state. Remember, this is a disaster recovery solution, so there is an expectation for some level of outage during the migration process. So obviously I can shut the virtual machine down. So let's just take a few seconds to close the machine, and then we could try to do the planned failover again. If you was in a situation that you was going to be doing a disaster recovery failover, then obviously the idea would be is the machine is not running, and possibly even this physical Hyper-V host has failed in some way. So the idea would be you would actually conduct the failover response on the secondary system to bring up the latest version of the secondary machine that we have. So you can just see the virtual machine is now stopped, so it's switched off, and we can now actually go in and initiate our planned failover. So again, same options as before, but hopefully this time when we actually initiate the failover, everything should run much smoother. So we've obviously passed the tests. We're then just obviously making sure that we're copying the last moment of data across, okay, and then hopefully going over to the sort of replica server to actually sort of confirm that the replication process has been completed. So hopefully just finishing off that last piece of copying. There we go, just reversing the direction of replication. So we've managed to succeed in reversing the replication, and we're now actually starting the replica virtual machine. So that's now regarded as a successful planned failover. So you can now see the primary server is now changed and the replica server is now changed. You can actually see, obviously, got some snapshots on the primary, and obviously the secondary server is now up and running. And if you look in the little thumbnail window, the machine was just booting, and again we see the same changed status information on the secondary server. Now obviously this doesn't go and do anything like change IP addresses inside the virtual machine, so that would maybe be something you need to do, or you'd need to have some form of stretched VLAN or some other sort of IP address management solution, because potentially this machine would be off-site, and maybe some IP addressing work needs to be focused on. Okay, if I actually go to this machine and right click, hopefully I can connect, and because it was a planned failover, we should hopefully see we haven't lost any data. So because the machine was shut down and we did a synchronization afterwards, we have all of the data that was available to us. If we go and create another folder, okay, so one for unplanned failover, okay, and in this instance we'll initiate an unplanned failover. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right click and basically turn the virtual machine off, so as if the power was just pulled from it. So there we go. So effectively could be as if the physical environment's broken. I could have done things like pull the power cable out if I wanted to. So having now gone back to my primary machine, which is obviously the secondary terms are being replicated to, what I could do is I can initiate a failover. Okay, so at this point I get to choose the latest recovery point that's available to me. So it would always put the latest recovery point, but if I wanted to go back to a previous point in time, I certainly could do. Okay, so I could pick either of the two. So we'll go back to a previous point just for the purpose of illustration, and hopefully press the failover button. Failover, and that would then actually go and start the virtual machine from the point in time. Now you can see again I've got all the snapshots listed there, so I could have chosen, so effectively from that drop down box it's allowing me to decide which snapshot I want to bring the machine up against, and therefore initiate that start. So we can see the virtual machine is booting. When the virtual machine's up and running, obviously you'll be able to log in. So again, this is really about providing a disaster recovery solution where you've got a copy of a virtual machine at a remote location, if necessary, and you synchronize changes very frequently, but not real time. So again, say it could be between a branch office and a head office. It could be between an organisation and a service provider. So there's various scenarios where this could work quite successfully. So because I went back to an older snapshot, but actually any of the snapshots would have shown this exactly the same, the unplanned failover folder wasn't there because it's not replicating real time. Okay. So thank you very much for watching this video. Hope the video has been useful for you. I look forward to you viewing some of my other videos on Hyper-V version 3. Thank you. Bye bye.